All right, let's get into it. Today, we're taking a close look at a really groundbreaking paper from the journal World Psychiatry. This isn't just a clinical overview, it's a deep dive into the subjective reality of postpartum mental illness. We're going to explore not just what these conditions are, but what it actually feels like to go through them.
So what makes this paper so different? It's all in the method. This is the first bottom-up review of its kind. It was co-written by academics and, this is the crucial part, by women with direct lived experience of postpartum depression and psychosis. The paper calls them experts by experience. The whole point is to fill this huge gap in clinical understanding by finally giving a voice to the unspoken, unheard parts of these illnesses.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll quickly touch on that unique co-production method. Then we'll explore the inner worlds of postpartum depression, or PPD, and then postpartum psychosis, PPP. After that, we'll zoom out to see how society and culture play a role, look at the barriers people face in the healthcare system, and wrap it all up with the key clinical takeaways. The research really organizes everything into 4 key areas of lived experience. You've got the personal, subjective experience of PPD, and then the separate experience of PPP. Then, there's the impact of the wider society, and finally, what happens when women encounter the healthcare system. We're going to walk through each one of these. So, first up, let's just briefly highlight this patient-centric approach again. You see, moving beyond clinical checklists to actually capture the phenomenology, the real qualitative nature of the experience, that's what makes this work so vital for actually improving care.
All right, let's start with the inner world of postpartum depression. The language used by the women in this study is incredibly raw and powerful, and it really gives us a window into a struggle that's so often invisible.
One of the most important points right off the bat is the onset. This isn't the baby blues, a gentle slide into sadness. No. Women described it as being hit with a ton of bricks. One minute you feel normal, the next you just don't. And this often comes with this profound emotional numbing, a state where mothers are going through all the motions, feeding, changing, bathing, but feeling absolutely no joy, like they're just mechanical robots.
And this emotional numbness creates what the paper so brilliantly calls the guilt gap. Imagine this giant chasm. On one side, you have society's ideal of the perfect, happy mother. On the other, you have the woman's lived reality of feeling like a bad mother. And this gap is just fueled by this loss of your old self, a sense of depersonalization, like you're just a walking womb, and this absolutely suffocating guilt for not feeling that love you're told you're supposed to feel for your child.
This quote from the study, wow, it's just so stark and devastating. I am an asshole. I feel nothing for this child. It perfectly, brutally captures the self-loathing and that complete emotional disconnect that can define the absolute depths of this experience.
As the illness progresses, there's often this terrifying loss of control, a feeling of being a tightrope walker with no safety net. The suffering can become so intense that, paradoxically, death starts to look like a glimmer of hope, the only possible escape from what feels like a living nightmare. And it's really important to note, clinically, that while thoughts of harming the infant can occur in PPD, they are often what's called ego-dystonic, which means the mother herself finds these thoughts deeply horrifying and distressing.
Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about postpartum psychosis. While it can share some features with PPD, its inner world, its phenomenology, is really distinct, and in many ways even more terrifying for the person going through it and for their family. The defining feature of PPP is often this sense of cognitive chaos. The metaphor women used was having their brain in a centrifuge. It's this sudden escalation, like a switch was flipped. Thoughts just start racing uncontrollably, leading to pressured, rapid speech. And the moods? They can swing violently, like a kaleidoscope, from the deepest depression to intense euphoria or mania, often after days of not sleeping at all.
And this account from a patient just says it all. Without any warning sign, suddenly, my thoughts were unstoppable and flew around. That captures that feeling of a complete loss of control over your own mind, which is a core and absolutely terrifying feature of psychosis.
So this cognitive chaos often leads to outright psychotic features. The sense of self can shatter, what the study calls the split mind. This can show up as intense paranoia, a belief that the house is bugged, or delusions, maybe grandiose ones or terrifying ones about being persecuted by dark forces. And here's the critical distinction from PPD. In PPP, any thoughts of harming the infant are often secondary to these delusions, which unfortunately carries a higher risk of them being acted upon.
A truly devastating consequence of all this is a profound loss of insight and trust. The person often doesn't even realize they're sick, and they start to mistrust everyone, their partner, their parents, their doctors. As one woman put it, "I didn't trust anybody, nurses, police," and of course, this fear makes them hide their symptoms, which just strips down their relationships and isolates them at the exact moment they need help the most.
So let's just quickly recap the key differences here. With PPD, the dominant feeling is that numbing sadness. Cognition is foggy, self-perception is all about guilt and feeling like a failure. And the risk is centered on those distressing, ego-dystonic thoughts, and suicide is an escape. With PPP, the feeling fluctuates wildly. Cognition is that chaotic centrifuge of racing thoughts. Self-perception can be grandiose or persecuted, and the risk often comes from delusional commands.
Okay, we've been deep inside the internal experience. Now let's zoom out and look at the outer world. How does society, family, and our culture interact with these illnesses? Because as we're about to see, this external world isn't just a backdrop, it actively shapes the suffering.
A huge part of the suffering is what the paper calls disenfranchised grief. That means it's a type of grief that society doesn't acknowledge or validate because it totally violates the pervasive myth of the happy mother. And this gets amplified by cultural pressures. For example, the strong black woman schema can create an expectation to just handle everything alone. In some Asian cultures, the fear of losing face makes it impossible to talk about. The result is this massive gulf between a woman's reality and all these expectations.
Well, all that societal pressure inevitably leads to huge barriers when women try to get help from the one system that's supposed to be there for them, healthcare. So let's take a look at what the study found here.
The number one barrier above everything else is the profound fear that they're going to take my child from me. This isn't just about what people will think, it's a real fear about losing custody. This single fear makes countless women hide their symptoms, and it's made worse by failures in the system, like impersonal tick-box screening tools that feel dismissive, or having these very real, terrifying symptoms brushed off by a provider as just normal new motherhood.
So, with this incredibly deep understanding of the lived experience, what's the path forward? This final section is all about how these powerful insights can and really must change how we approach this in clinical practice.
The most important message for clinicians is to listen beyond the checklist. All those metaphors, ton of bricks, robot, centrifuge, they aren't just colorful language, they are vital diagnostic clues. The paper also urges doctors to proactively and non-judgmentally ask about intrusive thoughts to help lower that fear of child removal. And it stresses how crucial it is to educate the family. Often, partners and parents are the gatekeepers to care, and they have to understand what's really going on.
And this brings us right to the core take-home message. PPD and PPP are silent disorders. They are defined by this profound, painful disconnect between what society expects of motherhood and the actual lived reality of the illness. And so recovery isn't just about a pill or a therapy session, it requires bridging that massive gulf of misunderstanding.
So we end with this question, which this research really forces us to confront. How can we, as a society, as healthcare systems, as family, and as friends, do a better job of bridging that gulf between expectation and reality for new mothers? Understanding their lived experience, which this paper helps us to do, is the absolutely essential first step.